guys? Welcome to this current installment of Truth Noir. I might have forgotten to announce last time that we were still celebrating our 2nd year anniversary. I know I would stop, I said previously, if I forgot, but fuck it, it's my show. So we celebrate the 2nd year anniversary of Truth Noir, like till whenever I say so, right? So, we're here again discussing another important topic, unlike the last few episodes we were just fucking around. But we're joined by a good friend in general, old friend of the show. What's your title here, man?
Co-founder.
Co-founder and I don't know, CEO of Dromebox.com and ModCon, which will hopefully take over the earth and save us from ourselves. Mr. Louis Silverstein, everyone. He's sitting right next to me. Welcome back, sir. Old viewers of the show will recall that Louis came on to talk to us about the issue of net neutrality back when it was a thing about a year ago. And turns out it's becoming an issue again. So, Louis, tell us what the hell is going on, man. What developments have been made? How has the infrastructure of the internet changed?
Well, nothing has changed. To be honest, I mean, the thing is, back about a year ago, actually it was February of 2016,
Yep.
net neutrality, the legislation was passed. And there were a lot of these things written down that said that the internet was going to change in the way that ISPs were classified and how they had to deal with consumers. But the thing is, they were given a grace period of quite a long time. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but nothing really has changed in the way that the internet functions.
So to clarify for new viewers, an ISP, for us techno-tards out there, is a internet service provider.
Yes.
And these people are charged with providing you the Wi-Fi, the high-speed internet in whatever form you choose to receive it.
Kind of. So ISPs are what are classified as kind of last-mile providers.
Okay.
So the internet is, I mean, famously, it was called a series of tubes that information flows over. Now, that's true and it's not true. So the internet is made up of the infrastructure that is the connecting wires. So we have copper wires, which are phone lines, and Ethernet data lines. We have fiber optic lines, and then we have airwaves that are pushing like wireless communications.
So now, would it be correct to say that this is all of the old infrastructure over which your phone calls?
No, it's
not anymore.
It's not.
Okay.
And the thing is, it's very different than phone calls because phone calls are a technology that utilize language over a medium. So like when you pick up a phone and you make a phone call to somebody,
You speak into it,
it transcodes it, encodes it into some digital format, sends it over either radio frequency, Wi-Fi, or some other medium. And then on the receiving side, it's transcoded back into that sound wave, and you as a receiver can hear it.
and that's what you experience.
Right, but in that sense, you're also a piece of the computer because you're taking this natural language and you're interpreting it and understanding it. So where that differs from internet technology is internet technology needs a medium for which everyone to communicate that is agreed upon. So here's the thing. If you pick up the phone and you speak Spanish, and I pick up the phone and I speak English, you try and talk to me, I'm going to hear the words, but they're not going to make any sense.
Sure.
But that information is still going to go across those communication lines because it's just sound. The internet doesn't work like that. The internet is actually connecting different computers that have a agreed upon language. So everything that is connected to the internet has agreed upon TCP protocol. So that means that any computer that's connected is able to send these TCP or UDP packets. And that's how they communicate. So every computer is speaking the same language. So that means you have to have a bunch of standards that every computer adheres to. So it's not the same thing as like different people talking on a phone line. It's it's much more methodical, and it takes a lot more resources to have all these things on the same page, and there is not a layer of abstraction to it. So the phone company, when it is okay, you have your cell phone, I have my cell phone, we have our landlines, whatever. There is this thing where, because we live in the digital age, they do this thing called multiplexing. So multiplexing is when you take like 15 signals and you encode them together and you send them from this side of the country to the other side of the country as like one packet of data. So, but each packet has different information in it.
Okay.
And then they can take that and split it up and send it to the 15 different people that the phone calls are going to. But it's a way to, it's called backhaul. So you're backhauling all this information from point to point, okay? So these like packets are constantly flowing over the phone system. But the thing is, they only have to adhere to that telecom company's like protocols. If you're going across different companies, they've agreed upon ways to send their packets across those different ways. But that's a much smaller system. Like, you don't have independent phone companies that are receiving these digital phone calls and sending them to their smaller like cell phone like people, like their clients. So the telecom just industry is this closed system, and the belief is that people believe that the internet is very similar to this. There's that belief that it is this closed system, and with telecom, what they were able to do was they were able to say, yes, it is this closed system that only these companies control because they have the infrastructure. So we're going to make this what's called a utility for the people of the United States. So under I think it's Title 2 of the Telecom Act, Title 2 or Title 8.
Well, it's part of the Commons, right? Or should be. It should be part of the Commons.
Well, it's not really part of the Commons, but it's the FCC. The FCC made telecom a utility. So what was happening was back, I think in the 70s, they were going to try and like charge different things based on like what you were using the phone for. And the government was like, no, you can't do that because you own, it's like monopoly basically. We're letting you do this thing. You can't say somebody can be charged more for a business phone call than they can for a home phone call. So they made it a common carrier, which meant that you could only be charged for connections. So if you have two phone lines in your house, you can use those two phone lines to do whatever you want with those phone lines as long as it's legal what you're doing.
Yeah.
So that brings us to like the beginnings of the internet. Nick, that's not going to work over there. That computer's frozen. Sorry.
You getting any bites yet? So just so everyone at home knows that happens to be watching, the live chat is rocking right now. So if you want to send us some messages, talk shit to Louis and tell him he has a stupid haircut.
Hey.
Look, I'm not saying I would agree with your position. I know Louis probably wouldn't because, I mean, you have to own that. But if you have a critique for the show or if you want to say hello, please do so. Log on to Dromebox chat and, this is as much forum for you as it is for me and
I think
Louis
Nick will shout it out, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have the old telecom infrastructure. We now have the glass tubes and the big, it's a pretty massive infrastructure, right?
It is.
Like to transport the amount of data that companies like, when you think about Netflix or YouTube, like these companies transmit, probably not even terabytes, petabytes.
A lot of information.
Of data per day, which if you're familiar with a terabyte, a petabyte is 1,000 times more information than that. And so while you're all watching movies and streaming your favorite shows, these things are taking up a very tiny amount of space, but they're taking up space nonetheless on the infrastructure that exists for the internet to be transmitted.
Right.
And so what we're talking about net neutrality is the business aspect of these massive conglomerations want to have priority as well they might expect to have because of the amount of data, the amount of revenue they have, the amount of tube space that they're able to purchase. But then there's also the argument of like these are still should be the commons and people should be allowed the same data access at the same speed.
I disagree with you. So this comes back to, so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to establish a history here. So the history of this whole thing starts with basically the telegram. So telegram was the first way of sending data across long distances.
Yeah, about 150 years ago, right, this started?
1800s. I mean, the original concept of the telegram was theorized in the 50s. Like, that shit goes back a long time.
Sure.
But what it was this ability to send encoded information over long distances. So,
yeah, you had to know.
But it was point to point. It was where you had an operator at one place and you had a receiver another, and you had like relay stations between, but they were sending that information point to point.
Right.
So I want to take us to like the 90s and to the beginnings of dial-up internet, and think of like AOL and
if you're of a certain age, you
Earls.
remember that horrible dial tone of trying to connect to AOL.com.
But do you know what that dial tone is? What is that dial tone?
A modified fax tone.
What's it doing? Do you know?
It's communicating with a other device that allows it to transmit information to.
It's data. So what you're hearing is you're hearing it transmit information across the phone lines. So using the same idea that when you and I talk on a phone line, we're using our human language to communicate. An original modem was using sounds that was turning into basically they were flat tones, and each one of them represented a different number or bit that it was sending. And on the speaker, it would send that out to the receiving computer, and that computer was sending that information. So when you plug your phone in or you plug a device into your computer via USB, it's making those same tones, basically. That's what the information, if you were to listen to it, flowing over, sounds like.
Nothing really ever stopped being analog.
Right. Everything is still sent.
You just don't hear it anymore.
It's electrons that are moving at different frequencies.
Right.
So when you had those original ISPs, what you were doing was you were using your common carrier phone company to connect you to AOL's phone bank. And AOL's phone bank was they had massive server rooms, they had a ton of modems with many lines connected to them, and they were connected to servers. And what was happening was you dialed in to the AOL server, and then that server became your portal for exploring the internet.
So was this too much different from having a room full of Rosie the Riveter type gals in a call room connecting lines, but just like automatically instead of having people
Exactly.
do it?
So it's more of, it's just like that, where every time you signed on to AOL.com, your computer used a common carrier phone line to get you from your house to AOL's server center. And then when you called them, they had a robot computer that picked up, and your computer sent the
Right.
And what that said was, this is username, I was SimWizLou. This is his password. Do I have the authentication to connect this person to the internet, to the AOL internet portal?
Right.
The computer would check its database and say, yes, they're all paid up. Connect them into the server.
Right.
And then you would get the connected. You've got mail. Welcome. Like that whole shit.
Right.
And now you're in like the internet in a sense, because what you were in AOL's portal that was their web explorer. So you had all of the systems in AOL that you had access to. You had AIM, you had your email, you had the news portal, you had the games, you had all these different things. And they were different programs that resided on the AOL server. But you also had your browser. And the browser, what that did was AOL, as an internet service provider, they had agreements with other internet service providers and other networks that they had a registered DNS, which is a domain name system. What that does is it's basically the phone book of the internet. So they were registered in there, and you could type in CNN.com. And their web browser in AOL would look at this directory and say, what's CNN.com? And it would find this IP address, and it would call out to that IP address, which was a computer that was connected to the internet that was connected to AOL.
Right.
And then AOL would relay that information into its browser in AOL on your computer. So this was how you...
If I could ask a question, is that set of protocols, like all of these steps as far as getting you to be able to communicate with, like you get your AOL portal, you get to your requested web address portal, are all of these protocols and permissions still going on, but just at a much faster rate?
Yes, and it shifted a little bit. So what happened was, for a long time, the only way to do that was through copper phone lines, because you had to get from your house to the AOL server, or to the CompuServe server, or to the Errol server.
CompuServe.
Right? Names from the past. So then what happened was, in the mid to late 90s, we had these cable companies that had existed for a while, and digital cable was this thing that started to come about. And once you turn to digital cable, you free up a lot of information on these cable lines. And they actually run, so coax cable is 75 ohm coax cable that runs through your house. That's much more robust than the shitty telephone wires that the phone company uses. Right. So they had a lot more bandwidth to play with. And what they realized was, well, these digital cable boxes with pay-per-view and stuff like that, they were basically bidirectional computers that were requesting a thing. It'd get an access code, it could then decrypt the information, and you could see the show that you wanted to watch.
Right.
They realized, well, if we plug this into a computer, you can communicate with the internet, basically. We can create a hub at our facility that is an ISP, but you can communicate with your computer to our computers via this cable line. So that became the first high-speed internet service providers, were these cable companies that had basically hacked their cable to allow you to start sending data over the cable bidirectionally, not just video information. So what happened was, these are not phone companies. So they were not classified under the same FCC regulations. They were this new thing. They were considered a luxury item because these were private networks owned by these cable companies that they could give you this information. So in parallel, what happened was phone companies started to install data-only lines. They were ISDN lines. And those were dedicated, but they also didn't fall under the same regulations as the phones did, because these were not meant to actually have voice over them. They were just, if you had a business and you needed to have the fastest connection from this business to the next business, you installed an ISDN line, which was basically a point-to-point connection for your business. Then they realized, we can install an ISDN line from your business to our hub, and that will let you connect to our network connection much faster. So this became the beginnings of high-speed internet. And it was these two parallel paths but they intersected. The place they intersected was where the internet itself resides, which is the network of computers. But you have to have a portal into that, a gateway of sorts. So if you're using a phone, the way you got there was via common carrier into an AOL type company, which was just a server bank that was connected to the rest of the internet. Or you had your cable company or phone company that was both your connection and your servers. So either way, you had to go from your house to some set of servers that is going to interpret your information and send it to the internet.
Right.
Okay.
So this became our last mile
Yes.
ISPs
Yes.
that we're talking about in present day.
Exactly. So the place that it starts to get foggy is in the late 90s. Everyone starts to shift to the high-speed internet model. So they lose their connection to the internet via a last mile provider, which is the phone company, and they go directly to this luxury service, which is your high-speed internet provider, which is your cable, or your phone provider, which has installed specialized wires just for the internet. Okay. But the thing is, you still have to go through some type of computer connection to get to the rest of these other computers, because you can't just make a direct IP call from your computer to another computer's IP address, because they're not just connected one-to-one. You have to go through someone else's network to get there.
Otherwise you would have to have a billion point-to-point connections for every website
Exactly.
that exists.
So if you go on your computer, or if you have an app on your phone, you can do what's called a trace RT, which is trace route. And a trace route, you can put in the name of a website that you want to connect to, or an IP address, and it will show you what networks it goes through from your home network to the receiving server. And what you'll see is you go through as many, as few as like 3 hops to as many as like 30 hops. A hop is one network to the next. And all of those different networks are owned and operated by different companies. And each one of them has to have an agreement with the next one to connect.
Right.
Otherwise, you can't get there.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to see the thing.
Right. So what has happened with the way the internet has evolved over the years is those different companies have, a lot of them are backbone companies, which you'll never see that company. You've never even heard of them.
You're not going to contract with
Right.
them as a private user.
Right. What's going to happen is like the city of Los Angeles, or no, not whatever the ISP is in Los Angeles, is going to say, I need to get my data from this city to this city. We're going to make a contract. So that's a backbone provider contract that they're going to make. So you're not going to see them, but those are there, and they have to be there. But that's the infrastructure that they're using is not telephone infrastructure. It's infrastructure that these companies privately have invested in to make these connections. And ones that have a lot of money have made much more direct, fast connections across the country. And then if you don't have that type of connection, there are smaller ISPs that don't have the access to that, and what they're going to do is they're going to hop from Los Angeles to Houston to New Orleans to Miami up the East Coast, and like that's why their connections are a little bit slower, is because they don't have the direct connect that goes from Los Angeles to New York.
Right.
So that's just how it's built. So what's happening with the internet is, I think people are not understanding how it works. Is they don't realize that when I have the internet on my phone and I'm connecting to Facebook, that I'm not directly connecting to Facebook. I mean, I am directly connecting to Facebook in the sense that my phone eventually gets to Facebook and it sends me a signal.
Right.
But I have to go through all these other networks to get there.
Yeah, all people know is that, well, I can like a thing and then it does that immediately, or at least apparently to the user. It still is going through all of these different protocols
Right.
of asking permission to connect, and all of these agreements still have
Yes.
to be in place for you, wherever you are at, to be able to connect to that.
Yes.
And so does that catch us up a little bit?
A little
to,
bit, yeah. We're
what's-
getting closer.
Okay.
So now we're getting to this idea of what is net neutrality. So what I've heard from my peers, net neutrality is this idea that anybody that is connected to the internet can get any information they want without it being throttled. There is no preferential treatment to any connection over another connection, and you're going to get the fastest connection that you can get based on the technology that exists. The legislation that was passed last year said that if a network has fiber optic connection, you as a user would get basically the percentage of that you would be entitled to based on how many people are connected to it. So if you have a 100 megabit connection that is in one neighborhood and you have 100 people, every single person should get 1 megabit
per
per connection. That doesn't preclude somebody from getting 15 connections and making a 15 megabit connection, but every single person is entitled to
at least that one.
A percentage.
Right.
Well, it would be weird because if you had 100 people, 100 megabits, and one person wanted to buy 15 of them, you would then have to divide it evenly based on the percentage of adding 15 fictional people, in a sense. You get what I'm saying?
So you still come out with a faster connection,
but you would have to factor it in less,
that's where you get into statistics and...
Yeah. And that's where net neutrality doesn't really work. Because here's the problem. The internet, like we've been discussing, it's a tangible thing. Like, it's a physical thing based on servers, routers, infrastructure, agreed upon software protocols. Like, all these things cost money to make and maintain.
Sure. And
man, net neutrality came up because of Netflix, pretty much. So the infrastructure of the United States is copper and fiber. We injected a lot of money into the industry to replace a lot of copper with fiber, but fiber isn't like infinite. You don't get like infinite. You don't get infinite connection just because you have fiber optics now.
Right.
You have a certain number of information, like bandwidth.
Yeah, it's like hundreds of times faster or something like
exponentially more than,
or hundreds of times more information that's available for usage if you do that as opposed to the same space with copper bundles.
But here's the thing. So the reason that Netflix is so different than the reason the internet changed with Netflix was before Netflix, most of the internet was what's called static usage. So what that meant was you requested a website. Let's say you go to IMDb because you want to look up Norman Davis on Truth Noir, right?
Which does not exist yet.
Well, that should.
Mind you.
So if you go to IMDb, you make a single call to IMDb, and IMDb sends you a page worth of information, and then it stops. And the next time that you click on next, you get another page worth of information, and it stops.
Right. And if you go online to buy something, like these are kind of going back to those like point-to-point transactions.
It is point-to-point, but it's static. It's where you are requesting a certain bundle of information, and then it stops. So
we're talking about the difference between that and
Netflix.
Trying to watch a movie.
Right. So when
that is a streaming.
Right. Because here's the thing. Let's say you have a 100 megabit connection in a neighborhood with 100 people on it, right? It's going to be really difficult for 100 people if you're doing a static-based web like paradigm.
Yeah, to stream a movie.
No, not stream a movie. No. Let's say you have 100 people. The likelihood that 100 people are going to click on a website at the same time and need 100 megabit throughput is very, very low. So what that means is pre-Netflix era.
Yeah, until that happened.
Right. You guys can share a 100 megabit connection, and maybe one asshole is going to be downloading something off of BitTorrent, but like the rest of the neighborhood is going to be getting internet sites loading like this because they're getting bursts of internet. When you hit streaming of Netflix, you no longer go from this static sense where like I'm only getting 100 kilobytes at a time, but you need to get a megabit of video at a time to get an HD signal. Right. So now, the way that the internet was like architected was you had a 100 megabit pipe that went to a neighborhood, and not 100 people. You weren't giving 100 people 1 megabit each. What you did was actually split it up into like 1,000, and you said, here's 1,000 people that are going to connect to a 100 megabit connection
at various points
in time. But that means that like you have that little asterisk on your contract that says like you're going to 50 up, 50 down, whatever that is. That's at like maximum throughput when no one else is using it.
Right.
But they have a minimum they have to guarantee you. So what happened with Netflix was the Northeast Corridor, New York in particular, everyone in New York City started watching Netflix. So that really taxed the infrastructure of Comcast. And so Netflix didn't have an agreement with Comcast. Netflix had an agreement with a backbone provider, which was basically injecting the information into the backbone, and then then Comcast had to basically deal with all this information being sent to all of its customers. But like we said a minute ago, those systems were built to have 100 megabits with 1,000 people, not every single person using every bit of bandwidth they are promised at every given moment. So what happened was, in these contracts that you have with your internet service provider, you have what's called an SLA. An SLA is a service level agreement. That's actually the thing in your contract that tells you what you're going to get. It tells you what needs to be provided in order to not have the company default on their obligations to you.
Sure.
So, if you look at your SLA for most consumer internet connections, you're going to see that they only have to guarantee you like 2 megabits down and 512 megabits up. But
definitely familiar with that, trying to upload stuff to, it takes me a half hour to upload an episode to YouTube of this show.
But in a world without streaming, you're never going to be pushed all the way down to that limit. You're going to get somewhere close to what you're paying for, because those networks were meant to do that. So in New York, what happened was they were pumping a ton of Netflix to a ton of people, and their network got so close to defaulting on the SLA. What happened was, like, they could not support all those people watching Game of Thrones, where the fuck they were watching.
Right.
And they looked at their network statistics, and they were able to isolate the packets that were causing the issue.
So these things like AOL Time Warner merger that like we saw as these like ultra carnivorous hostile takeovers or whatever, like as much as they probably were, it was also kind of done out of necessity for a sort of nascent system of like, we don't know what the fuck to do with all of this demand and we're trying to meet it.
Right.
And also trying to make as much fucking money hand over fist as we can as well.
But there's the thing is, like, this is a capitalist system. I mean, you have supply and demand. The problem is the demand went through the fucking roof, and the supply on the infrastructure was just,
ill-equipped to handle it.
So what happened was they saw that Netflix was using all this information, and they were like, well, we gotta tone this shit down because the rest of our users that aren't using this, their internet is crawling. So what do? We need to throttle Netflix because our infrastructure isn't built to deal with this.
Right.
Netflix cried foul. They went, look, we have an agreement with the backbone. The backbone gives us as much information as we want because we're paying them a shit ton of money.
Right.
They have an agreement with you that you say you are going to supply the information that they give you because your network can handle it. Comcast said, well, no. Like,
so basically, it was all of the companies that were contracting through major backbone infrastructure that all merged to work together to
fight for net neutrality,
assuage this sort of
So what happened at that time was,
so they were originally fighting for net neutrality.
They were never fighting for net neutrality. What they were fighting for was the ability to not pay ISPs to improve their networks to meet the demand of their clients. So you had Google, which was YouTube. YouTube is a gigantic streaming network.
Almost everything now.
Yeah. You had Netflix, you had Hulu, you have Facebook, and what is so special about these companies is they don't provide infrastructure. They're just services that flow over the internet.
Right. And
they position their data centers in areas where they had direct connections to the backbone. So what they had to do was make connections with those backbone companies, and those backbone companies had pre-existing agreements with the ISPs that they would deliver their information, their content. The Netflix issue set a precedent that said, well, the ISPs are going to look at what data is coming from where, and if it is too much, they're going to throttle it to continue to meet their SLA.
Yeah, prioritize accordingly.
Right. So these companies, they're great media machines, and they banded together and said, look, we don't want to have to be held hostage by these ISPs. We already made these gigantic agreements with these backbone companies. Let's start the PR machine and drum up this thing called net neutrality. And let's put it under the guise of, people, you want access to these things, you're paying for your internet connection. Why should they tell you what you can and can't look at? What they don't tell you is, well, if we just coughed up some more money and actually made agreements with the companies, you would actually get it, because it's not the fact that like they're throttling it because of you, they're throttling it because of us, because our data is too much to support their infrastructure is.
Is it not true that these companies would pay these last mile providers a little bit to help bolster
No, they weren't doing that. They weren't doing it. They didn't want to. So they lobbied for net neutrality. And they did it under this whole thing of, people need access to all this stuff they're paying for. Like, if you're paying for your 50/50, like, internet connection, you should be able to download Netflix at 50 by 50. How much time do we have?
We have 7 minutes.
7 minutes. Oh, I got to wrap this up quickly. All right. So
Louis, net neutrality, good thing or bad thing?
Horrible thing. It's going to fuck the consumer in the end. Because in the end, you're going to pay for the infrastructure no matter what. Net neutrality is only going to make it so that the companies that you want to utilize are going to just, I don't know, it's not good.
And if they start getting greedy, they can start, because there's no one else basically at that point.
It's not
like
if
VidMe tries to go up against the Google conglomerate.
Well, here's the thing. Net neutrality, they keep saying that it's for the little guy. That like net neutrality is going to let the little guy compete with like Facebook and YouTube and all that shit. That's a total lie. We are the little guy here.
Well, yeah, and this is what I wanted to ask you, and I feel like this is what the crux of the episode that we didn't quite get to last time was meant to be. How does the little guy like Dromebox, we all create content here, if there's anyone still watching, thanks. And also, like, this is a thing that affects your ability to watch independent media directly. How does this affect?
Yeah, so we got to go back to AOL. What was that CD that you got from AOL in the mail? What did it do? What did it give you?
I assume it had a dial tone in it.
No, but what did it say printed on it in big golden letters? 100 hours of free internet. 100 hours of free connection. Because what you were getting was 100 hours of data throughput through their system. That was because you weren't paying per minute for your phone connection to them, because that was common carrier.
They were not able to interfere with that.
Right. You were making a local call, and that was, as long as you had that phone connection, you got as much minutes on that phone line as you fucking wanted. But AOL was able to charge you for the minutes that you had on their computer. Right. Process time, process cycles. So if you make the internet a common carrier again, if you make the fiber optics that gets you to the internet a common carrier, you still need to have a middleman IS, you still need to have some server bank that's getting you from point A to point B. There's nothing in that legislation that says they can't start charging you per kilobyte again. Your phone, when you have a data plan, you're not using your common carrier minutes. What you're using is your data minutes.
Right.
If you continue to leave the legislation in right now for net neutrality, what that leaves them open to is you've cut off their ability to charge you per connection speed. What's the only thing they can charge you for at that time left? You have connection and you have data. I don't want to be charged per kilobyte that I connect to the internet.
Yeah, because when you have this sort of concept that, oh, we're going to 4K, we're going to 6K, like this is infinitely more data that you're streaming for your higher quality video. And because I have a unlimited data plan through T-Mobile, and even at that, I only get like 38 gigabytes
Right.
of their guaranteed high speed.
Here's what I'm gonna
I don't
equate it
get
to.
I don't get charged for the slower data, but it's going to be slower after that.
So I want to bring it back to the idea of a pipe. The internet is a series of tubes, right? So think of a faucet. Dromebox.com is a faucet.
Yeah, you guys broadcast a lot of fucking data.
But here's the thing. But we are at a constant drip. We're a constant flow.
Sure.
And pre-net neutrality, you could buy a flow size. You get to say, I want this many like ounces of water per second over my tube.
This
Okay?
is the amount of data we're going to
Right.
be running
And
through your system.
I can run that because I have a dedicated connection. I can run 5 megabits of data up and down every month, at every minute of every hour until the shit turns off. That's my amount that I am allotted. And as much information as I can fit into 5 megabits, I get to send that out to the world. So I then can distribute that via what's called a content distribution network, CDN, that gets to the people that are watching this, and it replicates that out longer. The net neutrality model says you get a bucket, basically. Here's your bucket of information you get per month. Because you get to fill that bucket up as fast as you fucking want, but all you get is what you can fit in this bucket.
Sure.
I know, just me personally, if I had to survive and all I got was water from a tap and I got either a bucket or a constant flow, I'm an idiot. I am not going to know how to like really partition out that bucket of water to last me a month. I much rather that flow of water.
You got to be wetting a paper towel.
Right. I know that every hour I'm going to get a glass of water versus at the beginning of the month I have 30 gallons of water. I am much better at understanding every hour I get that glass of water, and I can do much more with that. I can turn that into I can make a meal out of that somehow. Like I can do something with that much more crafty
Sure.
than I can just a fucking bucket. So net neutrality is the bucket approach. Pre-net neutrality or no net neutrality is the flow approach. I think that for consumers, in the long run, the better way to do it is to be getting that constant drip, as opposed, you don't get an IV that just injects it all into you at 1 second because you fucking die. You get a drip. I think the drip is the best way to do it. And that's what pre-net neutrality or overturning net neutrality will do for the internet. It allows it to sustain itself. It allows people to actually get what they're paying for, but it doesn't actually isolate anybody and make them pay for the infrastructure. No hold bars.
So net neutrality is sort of the sort of Trojan horse.
It's the rally cry of the people that don't want to pay for the things that you are utilizing. It's companies like Google and Netflix that are making a shit ton of money, and they don't want to pay extra money to the infrastructure to improve it so that their clients can get access to it. They want you to pay for it, but they're going to tell you that you're not paying for it because it's net neutrality and the government's going to make them pay for it. But no, you're going to pay for it no matter what.
Yeah, like there's these kind of buzzwords and net neutrality, that sounds like a good thing. Did we finally get a message, Nick?
We did it, but I have a question. So
Yeah.
right now is the
2 minutes we have.
we have 2 minutes, and like in 5 minutes it's gonna be like closing of the last questions to the FCC. Like everyone's seeing those like stupid net neutrality like Facebook ads. Like so now they're just getting it like they're pretty much buying stupid people.
Yeah.
So
Completely.
it turns out that net neutrality is silencing the independent voice.
Well, net neutrality is going to choke us out, because what will happen is if net neutrality actually continues as is, and the ISPs then turn to the model of, well, we can't charge you per connection, and we can't give you a dedicated this is your speed, because if 10 more people in your neighborhood log on, we're going to just reduce the speed because we're not going to make it faster.
Yeah, by 10 times.
Right. What we're going to do is we're going to charge you for the amount of data that you send. So we're going to have to get, well, I mean, here's the thing. Let's tie this into conspiracies on your show, right? My conspiracy theory is the reason the Obama administration wanted net neutrality was if you have net neutrality and you can't charge per connection, you can't charge per how much data is flowing, what metric does that force you to work on?
Sounds like socialism to me.
No, it makes you work on compression.
Right.
So we built an infrastructure that allows you to send a lot of information really fast to a lot of
We have
places.
1 minute left, Louis.
All right. Sorry.
Less than a minute.
But net neutrality was this thing that I think bolstered compression technology. It was meant to say, look, you're going to have to compress this shit and send it as fast as possible.
It's a stopgap, right?
Yep.
And that's what all of your internet radio is. That's why all of your internet music radio sounds like garbage, because it's compressed beyond recognition. Anyways, you guys, if I could get hi. So yeah, unfortunately we run out of time as we always do, but I want to thank Louis Silverstein once again for coming on and explaining like a weird fucking abstract thing to us that is a buzzword, but it's also a thing that affects your daily, everyday life, because like, what do you exist on if not your phone? Like, these are things that are important. So we're going to follow up with Louis again as these things progress. We're still celebrating the second anniversary of Truth Noir, I think halfway into the year. So also, ModCon is the savior of society. And you'd be wise to look it up and keep yourself informed and supported if you can, because, like, I mean, honestly, no one else gives a shit about you. I do kind of, like, I'll take a selfie with you if you come up to me and say you recognize me. So will Louis. Anyways, we'll come back at you next week with more weird shit, and until then, see you next time. Get home safe. Take care.